Hey everyone, so happy to see you all here. Today we're going to talk about transforming your company culture. Welcome to an Invincible Innovation Live show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Mazor, Kario, product innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And I have a very, very special guest with me. Hi, Colin.
Hi, Adi. Nice to meet you. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy that you're here. Colin Duff is the CEO of Mosaic Innovation, and I'm sure you're going to have a wonderful talk. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And before we start all the discussion, I want to ask you, what are these big obstacles to innovation? Why is it so hard?
Well, just to set the scene, I think the innovation failure rate is between about 70 to 90%, which is a real dependent on the industry and the challenge, which is a real indictment on the innovation community, to be honest. And it's such a big question. I could talk about it all day, but maybe let me just pick out two or three of the big reasons why innovation fails so often. And my experience is mainly in large enterprise. And it's so interesting when I speak to executives and say, is innovation a top priority? 100% yes. When I say, do you have an innovation strategy? Not quite 100% no, but the amount that don't is scary. They always have a corporate strategy, but not an innovation one. Now, the reason that's important is without that, it's impossible really to evaluate opportunities. So we're often seeing teams running off, getting excited by new technologies, and then they develop these really cool ideas, try and bring them into the mothership, and they get rejected. It's almost like this kind of kryptonite of we don't have the capability, it doesn't fit our
Yeah,
business model. So is it one of the first things I'd always say is get, even if it's quite a simplified strategy in terms of, and I always think about it, the kind of exploit strategy. So how can we make our existing business more efficient? How can we do sustaining types of innovation to prolong the life or augment our existing value propositions versus the more sexy ends or often they explore. And this is where we're searching for new business models. We're looking at different verticals, more longer term and sometimes bleeding edge innovation. So I think as a minimum, you want to have those two buckets because the methods, the metrics, the mindset are very different. And then
yeah,
linked to that, almost an innovation thesis. Now, it sounds horribly academic, but it's just a
yeah,
really simple way of thinking about how do you think things are going to play out in your arena in a medium to long term horizon. So typically 2 to 5 years. And that's from a kind of consumer or customer lens, a technical regulatory, and those other lenses. And by having that alignment, you can at least start trying to innovate in the right places, which is half the
yeah.
challenge.
Yeah,
Um,
it seems to me that most companies will say, okay, we want to do it, but it's sometimes we're not ready for the risk, right? And because they're
yeah,
doing things the way that they're used to, they're doing very small steps because this is what they're used to doing.
yeah, and I think some of these companies really need a kind of wake up call that and the risk of disruption. So there's so many examples of companies that are seemingly well run. They're doing everything right, but they're not addressing those fringe elements, those kind of people on the periphery. And Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, he always used to say snow melts at the periphery. So those little interesting, insignificant things. There's another great quote where I think it was the CEO of Blockbuster. He was at a conference and someone said, "Are you worried about Netflix?" And he laughed and said, "Is the US worried about the Albanian army?" Now, he might have been right that they were a little pinprick at the time, but we know where they became. So it pays to be paranoid. And I think, we often use case studies, Kodak and others,
Yeah,
just to try and jolt some of the executives out of their kind of I wouldn't quite
yeah,
call it lethargy, but it's always tomorrow's problem. So when I started in innovation, the first time I ran an innovation team, I'd never heard the expression Japanese no. And I kept bringing these really cool ideas. And no one ever said no. They always said, wow, that's really good. We should definitely do it. It's just not right this quarter. Why don't you come back in 3 months, 6 months? Now, it took me a while being starting out to realize that was
yeah,
always the answer. It was always jam tomorrow. So
yeah,
I do think you need to, scare these people. Bringing in maybe some of the cool startups is always a good thing because they're usually further ahead than people imagine. So that's something I've done. I don't know if you've got any advice, Adi, on it's quite a big question.
Yeah, it reminds me, you mentioned the blockbusters. I think I saw on LinkedIn even like a week ago. I don't know, they always take something from the past these people would love to forget. But it was, I think, the CEO of BlackBerry back
Yeah.
then. And he talked about the iPhone, and he said like Apple has like 0% of the market, and we are not afraid, right? So sometimes I feel that the CEOs and the management in general are too sure of themselves, because right now everything's fine, and what could happen because we're so big and strong right now, like this small thing could change us. Like it
You know, I like
doesn't look like that.
on the research in motion example, remind people that BlackBerry's biggest sales year was the same year as the iPhone launched, right? And it wasn't just one opportunity they missed, it was several. So BlackBerry Messenger at the time was one of the biggest social media platforms on earth, right? That could easily have been one of those big tech platforms. And there are many examples like that. So it's similarly with Kodak. Everyone dwells on the photography. They forget about the chemical division they had, and there's many other ones if you unpick these stories. So it's deep-rooted complacency,
Yeah.
risk aversion, myopia as well. So going back to that point about innovation strategy, I always find it really interesting to talk about, okay, so let's do as a percentage of sales, how much are you invested in innovation? And let's profile it. How much is efficiency? How much is sustainment, so improving things? How much is the more breakthrough, disruptive? And often very little on that latter piece, the breakthrough and disruption. And you're really just shooting yourself in the foot over the long term by doing
Yeah.
that. So surfacing the problem is a good first start.
Yeah, I think that if I see like the technology world till now, and I've been here like for, I know, more than 20 years now. I sound that old, but I've been here, and things have been like, okay, it's going faster. We need to be alert. We need to know that things are going fast. A startup can really start small and then just come and without us even seeing that, just to go and do much better than what we're doing. But I think that right now, I'm creating a course for AI products, and you see it's so fast.
Yeah.
So just imagine until they decide what they're going to do, until they allocate the budget, until they start doing something, until they find the right people, because they need to find someone who thinks differently from what they're thinking right now.
Yeah.
It seems like so many big companies are gonna be different after like in 2 3 years from now. Do you see that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this week's Harvard Business Review, or maybe it was last week's. There was someone from Microsoft on and saying they were tracking AI startups, the high potential, and I think they did a list of around about 100 3 or 4 years ago, and it's something like 8,000 now. And these are the ones that after all the screening, so the world is just speeding up. And one of the other bits of advice I give for companies wanting to be more innovative is a big mistake they make is they try and have one big idea and we're going to bet the house on this idea. But what all of the literature shows and my experience is, especially in the early stages, you want to place lots of small bets. So when you've did your market analysis, your trends, your brainstorms, etc., you'll probably come out with several high potential ideas. And the mistake people make is they stay in thought land. So they analyze to death, they build very sophisticated financial models based on dozens, if not hundreds, of unproven assumptions. So tiny junk, if you want to be uncharitable, and then they pick the winner, usually based on the highest paid person's opinion, whatever anyone says,
Of
you
course.
know, done analysis, right? And the far better way to do it is pursue multiple opportunities and run lots of little small real world iterative experiments. And that's something large organizations are still quite bad at. You know, I've had CEOs and other people tell me they're really proud that, oh, we got this thing out in 9 months. And you think, well, how long would a startup have taken to do that? Like 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Now, You
Of
might not
course.
be able to do it at that pace. Okay, you've got different pressures, but if you can increase velocity, and I'd say my advice, and Eric Ries in his book, The Lean Startup, says like something like those that the fastest are those who will win. It's how do you speed up the learning cycle? And that's something big organizations, despite all the talk of agile, it's still
Yeah.
very slow. And that's one of the first areas we start on a cultural transformation. People always assume, oh, we're going to start with people. But one of the things we'll do is say, well, how long is stuff taken? Because that's a sign
Right.
of function, right? And then we can unpick why is it taking long? And it's usually a whole laundry list of process. It's there is soft
Yeah.
kind of elements as well. There's
Yeah.
capability, but it's sometimes a better way to flush out things than just to ask people what's going wrong, and you just get
Yeah.
some trite answers.
Yeah, two things that came up to me when you said first, I think that they need to see themselves as managing portfolio as a VC, right? You have lots of bets, and one of them hopefully would be successful, and they need to think this way when they're managing their like opportunities. That's one thing. And the second is what you mentioned about the culture and how what's the pace of things. Coming from the Israeli tech scene, Israel is very fast. The people are talking fast and loud and rude sometimes, and it's everything is running all the time. And sometimes when I go and work with Americans in big corporates, I find everything is so slow. They have time until they make a decision, and then they think how to do it, and it's like so different. I don't know about the results. Sometimes they have very good quality results, but for sure it's much slower.
I think one of the big problems, right, is the annual planning cycle or even the 3 or 5 year cycle. And what the big companies are doing is they're allocating all of their money at the start of the year. And then what they're finding is that high potential thing hasn't panned out, but the team keeps the money and just plods on until the end of the year. And then other new opportunities emerge or small things grow, which can't get access to the cash. So what a smart VC would do is they'd do what they call metered funding. So they'd say, right, Addy, cool idea. Here's a small amount of money. Get to the next milestone, and you can draw down more funds. So I think you might still need to assign some money for the kind of more heavy lifting, like legacy system type stuff. But for the newer stuff, you need to be much more nimble with your resource allocation. So both money and people. And that plays a little bit to agile, but a lot of teams that are doing agile, it's purely from a people and not from the money perspective. So I think that definitely would speed things up.
Yeah, I think that in general they see it like as a more stable thing. Like in the past, we had like this waterfall thinking about a product or a project, right? And now it needs to be in short cycles. And more than that, people are a bit too comfortable when they're in a big corporate. And you see startups, they're always on the edge, right? And when you're hungry, you're doing things. And when you know that you'll have a salary for the next 3 years,
Yes.
let's
The bit no one wants to talk about in innovation, right? Because it's all about creativity and fun and playful and irreverence, is accountability, right? So if I empower you, I want to see results. And we're still seeing a lot of people coming back in 6 months and say, well, we failed, let's celebrate. I mean, it's meant to be the learning. But if you
Yeah.
learn something that was bloody obvious, and if it's taking you, I've heard of a team, there's a big oil company, a whole team, 6 months in discovery. I'm like, what were you doing? Like, come on, like
Right,
this
right.
should be like a few weeks at most. So there is that just people a lot of sometimes called innovation theater, just going and like, oh, we've looked at drones and robots and it's really cool. And it's like, well, what was the purpose, right? And more importantly, like, what is the result? So I think teams need to be conscious that I think there's a lot of people in innovation who are just in it for some kind of intellectual exercise, and they'll be, jam tomorrow, right? Give us a few years and we'll generate a few billion. But I think there's always this invisible clock. And when times get tough, that alarm clock rings and they say, okay, what is in this team's near term horizon in terms of 12, 18 months, 2 years? And you need to be delivering. And it goes back to that portfolio piece as well. So we all, when we're dealing with legacy enterprises, we blame senior management for being risk averse. But actually, the innovation community, has actually often been quite wasteful and not delivered on its promise. So I think if you've got that more balanced portfolio and you say, like, we as innovators, we can help meet, if not the short-term needs, innovation takes time, but we can deliver some value in the medium term and then take some more speculative plays in the long term. That's what most organizations, tech titans aside, are looking for. But you got a lot of people that are just, we're just going to do bleeding edge technology and just have a lot of fun. And 3-5 years later, we've not brought in any money, and no wonder people lose patience.
I think it's not that they're lazy or something. I think that sometimes it relates to the fact that it's not even the fact that they're interested in and curious and intellectually driven. I think that there is this kind of character that it's more than curiosity. It needs to be tangible, right? So I need to create something in the end, and I need to have a result. And the result couldn't be, yeah, we learned something, it failed, now let's learn something else, right?
I couldn't agree more. And also, I'd say the skills required for early stage innovation versus scale and delivery are different. So you do see sometimes people saying, I'm going to own the end to end. And you've done a great job identifying the needs, you've prototyping, proving it, but you're probably about the worst person to actually work out the scaling and operational delivery, but you stay on and then do a bad job. So, or you don't bring the people who are actually going to scale and deliver in early. So your idea, when it passes over, it becomes an orphan. It wasn't invented here. There's no glory in it for me. I don't really have any chance to shape it. So it withers and dies. So that's particularly when you set up the innovation hub and these kind of like external places where they're disconnected. So I've got a lot of thoughts on how to do that more effectively, but I'm not sure we have quite enough time.
Yeah, it reminds me of entrepreneurs in Israel when they start a startup and it grows to being some kind of more than a startup, right? And then they add more and more people and they have less impact and they get a bit bored because they want all the excitement of the beginning, right? And then they bring a new CEO maybe to be like growing the company to be much bigger. And in many cases, these people leave afterwards because it's not for them being like in a corporate.
Yeah.
But this collaboration between people who are really eager to create something new and these people who could grow it to be much more needs to be aligned, especially in corporates.
Yeah, I've had a funny story from there's a famous entrepreneur in the UK, and he phoned his office, and the receptionist, he says, "Oh, it's James," and the receptionist said, "James who?" And he said, "I knew that was my time to leave. He was the CEO." Like it just grown too big.
Oh.
So they talk about this Dunbar number. Once you're about 150 plus people, you stop being able to know everybody individually. So yeah, I agree. Some people are more suited to the smaller organization.
Yeah, and I think that people are less aware of their capabilities or skills in the big corporates because they're like a small part of everything. When you're an entrepreneur, you're doing everything, the things that you don't like, you would have to do, right? But when
Yes.
you have this very small role, you're so used to doing things like buy the book. This is my role. This is not what I'm supposed to do. This is not my responsibility. And then you're just stuck in there.
Yeah, and I think there is, and this is a pet peeve of mine, so it might just be my thing. There's a bit of an intellectual snobbishness in some large organizations. So we were doing an experiment in a retail setting, and we had some people from the client organization there, I'll not name them. And some of the issues we were coming up against were the polo shirts that were branded because we were going to be standing in store didn't arrive. So we had to run to a t-shirt printing company in the morning and get them made, right? And then we had actually to intercept customers. We're testing this new thing and hand out flyers. Now, there was a lot of people that said, I shouldn't be doing this. I'm a strategy manager, right? I've got an MBA. Do you know how much my time's worth? And we're thinking, well, actually, this is like a major innovation. This is actually the most important thing we could be doing now. But they just didn't like doing some of those kind of dirty, like activities, or the Wi-Fi in store isn't working, so we had to run out and get dongles so that we could power the solution we were testing. And I think a lot of people, they don't like that work that isn't behind the screen. And that's what being an entrepreneur is about. It's like real problem solving that you just can't anticipate. So I don't know if everyone's cut out for it as well.
Yeah.
It's not just all brainstorming, sadly.
Yeah, I see that what I said about tangible being practical is so important as a person. If you want to create something, you need to go and like go outside and try it and hear people and sometimes hear what you don't want to hear and all this like facade or being like I'm this MBA, I'm this manager. It doesn't really matter because you need to be humble in order to create these things. You cannot say, okay, I know everything and it's something that it's like you cannot be really creative when you're always holding yourself as this is my character, this is my facade, and I
Yeah.
cannot be anything else, right?
And you can, I mean, one of the other things I think particularly large organizations still do quite poorly is great innovation insight. So what they all do well, or most of them, is decent market research. So if it's like concept testing, is it good, is it bad, or brand tracking, absolutely they've nailed it. But unearthing those fresh, differentiated, and actionable things that lead to aha moments, they do that really badly. And that's because great innovation insight, it's usually more like a story than a stat. If it's in the statistics, it probably has already been actioned. So it really requires you getting out there and actually observing people in situ. So there's a famous saying about you can learn a lot from animals in a zoo, but you'll learn 10 times more in the wild. So like as an example, we work with a large electrical company and they wanted to do innovation in generators a few years ago. So those big machines that give you power outdoors if you're camping or on fairgrounds, they were convinced they needed an app. It was at that time when the solution to any problem was an
Yeah,
app.
and now
And I was out with this lady, and at a fairground, she operated a kind of chocolate stand, and she was pushing this big machine through the grass. And being England, it rained, and it just got stuck. And it was really
in the
interesting.
mud.
Wheels, and we looked, and every single wheel in the generator industry were these horrible little small things when you're actually going outdoor. And by motorizing those wheels and making them bigger, that was the category breakthrough innovation. And I can give you a dozen examples off the top of my head that are similar. And people say, well, do you really need this kind of approach in the age of digital, right? Why can't we just look at analytics and stuff? So it's interesting. Microsoft, they employ the second biggest employer of anthropologists and ethnographers after the US government in the US, right? So even the biggest tech companies see the need to have people doing first-hand observation. And
Yeah.
that's something that is just not happening. And so many companies are relying on, let's just look at how people behave in a website. You're not going to
Yeah.
get any great innovation from looking at that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah, I know it's a story that I tell sometimes. It's about user research. So I come from from an interface from design, and they mentioned that they want to create a toothbrush, and they wanted to create a toothbrush for kids, and they said, okay, we'll go and see kids when they're waking up in the morning, going to their bathroom and trying to see them, and they saw that it's not enough to have the same toothbrush, which is a bit smaller because their teeth and mouth is smaller. The way that they hold it, the grip is very, very different
Yeah.
because adults, they have like a way to hold it, which is very, very different. Their fingers are much bigger. And what they did, we have it right now that they have this bulky hand. For the kids, you have a toothbrush and it's much, much thicker. So you cannot really understand the way that a kid would hold it if you just don't go and stand next to him and see what he's doing. And in general, just going, being like away from your audience, customers, users, doesn't matter, is the fact that you're not close enough to them. And if you really want to understand them, you want to really be close and really feel them in a sense.
It's so many stories about, we get asked often as cultural transformation. It's often innovation, but sometimes it is just, can you help make us more customer centric? And when we're in a, like, for example, a room full of people, I'll say, okay, well, who's seen a customer? And I'll get them to do like a finger poll. Can't really see my fingers within the last month and then within the last 6 months. And there's people, including sometimes product managers, say, oh, I've never actually met some of our customers. And no wonder you have no empathy. There was a famous example from a hospital years ago, and it was the people analysing blood. and they used to actually meet the patients, and then they decided to move it to the basement. So it was just couriered down. They never seen them. And actually, the timescales actually leapt up, because when you see a person's face and realize they're desperate for their blood results for a serious condition, especially a child, you'll work late and move heaven and earth, where it's just another number. You know,
Yeah, I
I
don't care.
finished 10 minutes ago. And a
Yeah,
lot of companies have just lost that connection. So I was not going to add a disastrous cable story the other day where I phoned, and it was huge, heavy automation. And I wonder if anyone whose internet has ever went off from that company has tried going through that experience and would consider it to be a good experience. And I'm a big believer in automation in some contexts, but
yeah.
it's just such a poorly designed and obviously badly designed experience by somebody who's clearly a technologist but has never actually met a human.
Yeah. So going back to culture, I think that what we said is directly related to culture. Because if we're like this big entity or this big manager that knows exactly what to do, we don't need any input from you, the customer, because we already know from the numbers. And this distance is something that would keep them in their position with their salary and feeling good with what they're doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, what I would characterize as hubris. So you get a few good quarters. And the thing about innovation is, even when done well, it's typically going to take 18 months, 2 years to manifest in the numbers. So, if you take over a successful division, then yeah, I mean, the fastest way to short term boost the profit is probably to switch off the innovation. You save the money and you'll not get any hit, but you will start to notice it in time. So that's why it's really important and this it plays directly to culture, to almost have a dashboard of here are the financial results, right? But then here are the kind of future financial results using innovation metrics as a proxy. And that will be stuff like how many successful experiments have we run, validated learning, what is the revenue potential for stuff at different stages in the pipeline. And the rigor used to track that, we almost never see that. There are a few organizations, like people like Bosch, that are really world class at innovation accounting, but it's still quite a nascent field. And if you don't somehow quantify and report on it, it does too often get lost. So that's something about putting in these innovation scorecards at the team level, division level, company level. And it goes back to that piece around strategy,
Yeah.
is really important, because everyone likes to do all the human fun stuff. So they've got the kind of superficial, we'll do up the office environment, we'll run the hackathon. We had 10 brainstorms last quarter. Okay, but have you tracked the output, the progress? Sounds like hard work, sounds a bit dull, so no.
Yeah. But when I think about culture, the first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that these companies usually have bureaucracy, politics, hierarchies, people who are too sure of themselves, not too curious, staying in the same box of thoughts or procedures all the time. That's what comes to my mind.
So one of the things, we did a big transformation for a tech company last year, and it's all exactly as you described, the silos, the bureaucracy, everything about it. And what we did is, when you apportion blame, people get defensive. So the problem's you, Addy. No, it's not. It's you, Colin, right?
No,
When you talk
never me.
contribution and say, okay, what role do we all have? And what we did was we visualized using some humanist cartoons. So we didn't actually put the names or people recognizable. And we just did a session with some of the senior leaders and said, do you recognize these things? So one of them was on, I've got this brilliant idea, like, let's launch it. And then someone puts their hand up in the cartoon and says, oh, we did that 6 months ago, right? And everyone laughs. And then what we did is as simple as just the 5 whys. So it was just, let's do some root cause. What is going on here? And what are some of the actions we can take? Now, that didn't solve it by itself, because some of the root causes were things like process. So they needed, projects off the back. But again, you're surfacing the issues. In the case of process as well, I'm a great believer, absolutely, in the Drucker quote, right, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, etc. But you can't have like legacy 1990s processes in a modern world. So we worked with one tech company, and everyone was complaining that getting anything out the door was their expression, was just a real nightmare. And I always like to say, okay, well, let's actually see it rather than debate it. And they opened up this big, horrible spreadsheet. I think at 90 stages, it was a racy,
Wow.
so all the people responsible. It was indecipherable, right? And the business
Wow.
is saying it's really critical people follow these. And you thought, well, like, even if you wanted to, you'd struggle. And it was so prescriptive to say you must have this documentation. This is an agile organization, by the way, as well.
Agile, very
What we're
agile.
trying to do is say, look, what you want to do is typically people can't do more than about 6 stages. And under those, what are the outcomes, not the outputs? So, an outcome, for example, in desirability, have you proved there is a clear customer need? Now, you can do that in lots of different ways. It might be focus groups, it might be surveys, it could be all sorts of things, or use proxy data. On the viability side, so the financials, you have a reasonable sense of the size of the prize. And again, there are some methods and tools, but lots of ways. And technologically, can it be done? Do we have the capability at a top line? And you move through as time goes. So just by instituting that and giving people more flexibility, that improved velocity and engagement as well, because people stop being beat over the head. So Addy raises her head above the parapet, goes off, does some really cool entrepreneurial thing, and then the cybersecurity team will come back and say in the old model, yeah, but you didn't have this security passport that you weren't aware of, so we're going to stop your initiative. So
Yeah.
I do think you have to look, when we're talking specifically about innovation, is how user-friendly or entrepreneurial-friendly are your processes, and what are those kind of, particularly how long is stuff taken? And just one other build on that, and this is something I think like the top tip I'd give to leaders is you need to actually, you'll hear a lot of this term servant leadership. So when you're doing agile, you probably heard that it moves from being I'm smarter than you and I'm here to direct you and oversee you, to you're closer to the action and probably best placed to make decisions. My role now becomes how can I actually help you perform better? And what I've seen leaders do, and there was a good example, the chief marketing officer at Marriott, she went to a session where everyone's discussing all of their innovation initiatives. And she just said, right, what can I do? Now, some of the low level stuff, and there's people talking about, facilities, right, the printers broke, the HVAC. She got her phone out and messaged the people on the spot and said, could you fix it? Other ones as well, she's like, okay, there's a blockage in this area. Getting those meetings actually with people and saying we need to discuss this as a priority, and to see a C-suite person get involved, not in the minutiae, but actually unblocking some of those issues, it kind of shows the care, because I think there's too many senior leaders that are like, my job's just to do the kind of glamorous strategy, the intellect, the big picture, but it's often the kind of muddy, less glamorous detail. That's where people need your help. So you need to
Yeah.
get in the weeds a little.
Yeah, it's again being humble, because you need to be flexible with what the need is right now, what really is needed for us to succeed. And I would make my hands dirty. It's okay as long as it's beneficial for the company, and it's
Yeah.
not only beneficial for my power within the company or something like that.
Yeah. And
So
it,
how?
on the
Yeah.
humble one, or bit of advice, the best thing a leader can say to really prove that is, I don't know, right? And
Wow.
you
Saying I don't know. Wow.
don't hear it often, because we've got a big presentation for funding, and should we do it or not? And I don't know. Well, what do you mean you don't know? Well, we need more data, or run an experiment, or you make the decision because you're closest to it. And that's something I still hear very rarely, because it's very uncomfortable with your MBA and your senior position to be humble, like you say, and say, I don't know. So.
Yeah. So do you usually work within the UK?
Yeah, so we work, to be honest, globally. So we do a lot of work with companies like BT, HP, Marriott, and then various others. And about half of our work is in actually innovating, and then the other half is in capability, which is a mix of training, learn by doing, and cultural transformation, all interconnected to that. And I
Yeah.
think one of the things, a bit of a sales plug, that makes us different is, training aside, when we are doing capability, it's almost indistinguishable from the consultant side. I see so many, and particularly in training, just really infantilizing people playing with Lego and just
Yeah,
other nonsense and saying, okay, look, we've done this great thing. And I think, well, I've never, as an innovator, used Lego in my process. So I don't know why we're using it in your capability. Or wait a minute, it took you 6 months to produce this average thing, and you're holding it up as a sign of success. Like, the capability needs to have the same rigor and the same commercial impact. So when we do any learn by doing type thing, we'll always insist it's a real challenge. And at the end of it, wherever we get to, that it's going in front of senior management executives for investment approval to say, well, look, if you believe in it and these people have done a good job, put your money where your mouth is. Otherwise,
right.
maybe they've not learned, and it just holds people to a very different standard. I've got a very
Yeah,
low opinion of innovation training. It's really funny how companies, big like enterprises, if you work in finance, imagine saying, okay, we'll send you in a 1 day course, and now we want you to go and run the finance function. But that's often what's happening in innovation. So usually it's an introduction to design thinking, which is just totally high level, glossed over. Innovation's a rule these days. It's a discipline. Like, you can do a PhD in innovation. The methods and tools are there, but the ignorance is huge. And that's why we're getting so much pseudoscience. We're getting, my philosophy in innovation, right? I don't really want your philosophy. I'd much rather hear about, like, methodological kind of rigor. And it's amazing how many people are ignorant of the seminal methods. So design thinking, maybe people are, intermediate, but 10 types of innovation, blue ocean strategy, theory of disruptive innovation, these are just alien to most big organizations we work for. So
yeah.
I think there's a big effort to invest in upskilling your people in knowledge, as well as in some of the trade craft as well.
And do you find it different in different parts of the globe, like US, Europe?
I think it's probably less geographic and more industry based. So I think
Mhm.
top tier technology are probably leading the way, maybe because they have the resources and they've got the top talent who are demanding it or are aware of it. And once you get a taste of it, you just want more and more. Whereas there are other sectors where, you know, something like the construction sector, right? Probably the least innovative out there. And they just don't
Yeah,
necessarily see the value on it. So you get approached sometimes with someone saying, oh, we're going to have an innovation course this year. So just give us a session on creativity. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But most people are inherently creative. It's that their ideas are not going anywhere. It's the ideas are not bold enough. It's that we don't know how to measure them, right? So it's
yeah,
when you outsource this to HR and they don't have some of the HR leaders in the better companies, and particularly tech, because they're just our professional services higher skilled, they have a
yeah.
sophisticated conversation that's quite diagnostic and consultative and co-creative. Whereas other companies, financial services, they buy off the shelf and they just get,
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah,
dross.
it starts from the fact that you think it's going to be a course, it's going to be fun, and then people would start doing things without any like anchors within the process and within the strategy of the company and the money that could go there.
If you ask me, for front end innovation, early stages, people sometimes say, oh, like, what's the best way to upskill our people quickly? And there's a method, you'll probably know this one, called a design sprint. And put very simply, a
Yeah,
small group of people spend roughly a week together. They
yeah,
look at the
I've
problem,
been
get
doing
some
that
insight,
too.
and they build a prototype, usually clickable, can be physical, right? And they test it with half a dozen or so customers. And it gets them almost to the point of kind of problem validation to solution
Right,
outline.
right.
That is often what we recommend rather than a training course, because you're solving a real business problem and you're getting a flavor for the kind of somewhat end-to-end method. So those are the kind of getting beyond, like I say, design thinking 101 and your plasticine and Lego.
Yeah, yeah, I totally understand. I've been doing design sprints because I'm one of the experts for Google, and I studied that when I went there. And I find it very because you take a problem that they truly have. It's not like fun and games, and they want to solve it. And they see that if they invest the time and energy and in the right structure, they get to a result. It doesn't have to be a full. perfect result, but there is a result, and you could go from there instead of doing all the process that could take months or even years sometimes, and you don't get anywhere in many cases.
And you can be a bit cynical about innovation when people are doing all, like I say, the superficial stuff, the hackathon and the foosball tables. I mean, they're nothing wrong per se, right? They're like signalers if you
No,
want more playful or creative culture, but
right.
you need the substance. So we got
Yeah.
asked to run a hackathon at a big retailer, and I was talking to people, and they said, "Oh, we did this last year. It was a lot of fun." And I said, "Oh, great. What was the winning idea?" And it was this really cool idea. It was like brilliant. What happened? Well, nothing. We didn't
Nothing,
do it.
nothing.
And I thought, why are you doing another one? What worse way to breed cynicism than everyone agrees it's a great idea, but that
Yeah.
was almost separate, right? Like,
Yeah, that's the fun stuff, and
yeah,
the real stuff is here. You know what? A few years back, I talked to someone from Munich, and they mentioned someone who is part of a very big corporate in Munich, and he said, "Okay, all these people playing around in Berlin, starting doing startups, and all the entrepreneurs, we don't really care because the big money is here in Munich." So we don't really care about them. And you see and a few years after that, we talked about the car industry and Tesla coming to Berlin, and they built a big factory there in 3 years, which usually takes them about 7 years. And just thinking, we're going back to the way that you see your role in the company. You need to really think about it. You just, okay, you've done all that. It was lots of fun. And what would you tell these people? Yeah, it's for fun. We're doing it for fun.
yeah.
That's the purpose of what you're
I think
doing.
that, and the other one that always gets me is okay, so how long to do the culture? As if 3 months we've done it, let's move on to the next thing. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
it's an ongoing thing, right? You can always evolve and get better. And that's how, when cultural transformation, it's highly personalized. So I see people that say, oh, well, there's always a 6-step process. Now there's commonality of interventions, right? There is some success principles, but it's a bit like a diet or exercise plan. Everyone's varies slightly different depending on the context,
Yeah.
and
And
it's
it's
something
not
you need
fun.
to maintain. And if you are working with, like when we do it, anything beyond about 3 months, we won't commit to specifically what we'll do. We'll always try and sell it in a retainer model. And the reason for that is we say, look, we just don't know. So we did a big intervention last year for another tech company, and the coaching and mentoring was quite a small component of a wider program. And it just got so much traction and just was transforming people like nothing else. And we said, look, why don't we can a lot of the training and other stuff, and we just ramp up this coaching? Like the engagement's going through the roof. Like you're unlocking people's potential far more than helping them with theory. So it needs to be, just like anything else, quite agile and fluid. But I'm seeing so many people, particularly the big consultancies, and I used to work for one of them, where we're going to architect a 2-year cultural transformation, and it's all planned in advance. I mean, what a crazy way to approach it. But great
Yeah,
if you're a consultant and you want the predictable income. Really bad
of
if you're a
course.
company and you want the cultural impact.
In general, I think when in most cases they're selecting these big companies, especially because if they fail, they say, okay, McKinsey told us to do it, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, these big consulting firms, do they do innovation? What innovative ideas did they have in, like, I don't know, 100 years, doing more or less the same, maybe with more people? Like,
Yeah.
why would we get their ideas this way? Like, because they have the title and the brand?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on that. What I found, my experience, is some of the, let's call them the Big Ten, and I'm generalising because there are obviously pockets of excellence in there as well, is on, I guess, what I would call quantitative and maybe like the commercial robustness in terms of building financial models and technology. They were pretty good. On what I guess I'd call creative robustness, some of them were remedial. So particularly on things I mentioned before, like insight, because they do hire a lot more from quantitative backgrounds, which again, I'm generalizing, but they're typically less empathetic people. So, and in terms of entrepreneurial, because you've got a lot of MBAs in there, they think in a very, in some ways, systematic way, but they're not always great at problem solving. In fact, I think there's a stat from McKinsey, and when they're taking on MBAs, 70% of them fail the problem solving test, the case study. That's actually what knocks them out rather than the interview or the qualifications. Is they've got all this the book smart, but they don't really have what I call the street smart. So how would you get around it? So yeah, mixed experiences from the big consultancies.
Yeah. Okay, we could, I think we could go on for at least an hour, but we're almost done. So what is your number one tip for leaders today?
Well, we've covered a lot of it. I think the earlier point was getting your hands dirty, but I'm going to go a little bit tangential and just tell you one thing I hadn't thought about a few years ago, and that is if you're working in a multicultural organization, and most are, so you're across geographies, doing some work around cultural intelligence is really absolutely invaluable. So when it comes to, for example, communication, you've got certain low context countries like the US are very literal, or you take the other extreme, you've got Japan, where they talk about reading the air, and it's much more indirect communication. And just by working on those elements, and it's not just communication, it's how you deliver negative feedback, it's how you make decisions, and mapping people in the spectrum. I've seen teams who were at war or divisions where there was just, great disunity, almost have that light bulb moment of, oh, Adi, you're actually not this really difficult person. It's just the X.
So you're Israeli.
That is, it's something people always kind of groan and think it's some diversity and inclusion or just nice to do thing. It's probably for gelling and aligning a team one of the quickest and best ways. And because it's culture as well, you can have difficult conversations with a little bit of an alibi that you might not be able to have straight up to talk about why people are misaligned. So yeah, that's an indirect tip.
Yeah, I just saw someone mapping cultures, how I think how aggressive or confrontational they are, something like that. And I think that and how extroverted they are. So the Israelis were most controversial and most extroverted, and then we were like there on the peak. But when we're thinking about being an entrepreneur, you need to have this kind of energy sometimes in order to create that, right?
Absolutely. You need to kind of agree almost. It's like when you join a new team, I'd always say create a bit of a charter on how we behave, what are the rules. And it's the same in innovation as what is our kind of special sauce for how we operate here. And you do need to adjust a bit to the native country. So if you're going into a more hierarchical society, then maybe you do need to wear even a tie at a push. I know it sounds really old school, but otherwise you lose the belief of the people in that country.
Yeah, you're right. So it's been a pleasure talking to you, Colin. Where could people hear more about your work and contact you?
Yeah, so we're at mosaic-innovation.com, and there's a bunch of toolkits on there on things like innovation methods, 10 types, insight toolkits, etc. So check that out, and if you like it, get in touch.
Sure, I would check it out too. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Colin. I really enjoy talking to you. And as I mentioned, you have the best accent from all of my guests. 120 guests, and you're winning.
Yeah, I just hope you understood some of what I said. We'll be delighted.
I think I did. I hope I did. So it's been lots of fun and really insightful. So thank you for your time, Colin.
Likewise, thank you, Adi. It's been a pleasure.
And sure. And I hope we'll have another opportunity to continue that discussion. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya.